On to introducing Matt Samuelson. Matt was the Living Light, the head of the Living Light Culinary Institute chefs from about 2000 to 2004, at which point he left and he traveled the world as a personal chef to celebrities. He was a restaurant consultant, teacher, and caterer. He also launched a raw organic chocolate company. He's got samples and some bars for sale. So I don't know if you've ever have seen I forget what it is, the golden bean, just like the golden mean. So the golden bean, he's got samples and bars and literature here. And I love the name of his company, High Integrity Foods. And he's found himself back at Living Light Culinary Institute again, where he's back as the head chef. So his topic, making your time in the kitchen playful, fun, easy ways to create your own recipes so you're not tied to a book. Here's Matt.
Thanks, Shea. Well, hello everybody, welcome and thanks for coming out. Had a nice drive down from Fort Bragg and it's kind of nice to be in the sun a little bit. So what I want to do tonight is really look at food from a little different angle than a lot of times it is in a recipe book. A lot of times people kind of get tied to the idea of, having it come out a certain way. Actually, I was just talking with a lady at our table a few minutes ago, Lydia, and she mentioned something about wants things to come out perfect, and that got me thinking, and I'm going to touch on that in a little bit, because when you realize that you're starting with good, raw, organic ingredients, real healthy, vital food, it's already perfect. You're already starting with the best thing you can have, and what you do to it, if you do it with the right intention and gentle enough, you're only going to make it better, unless you overdo it and then you'll make it worse. So you got a lot of potential though already built in for it to be a good thing, just starting with that kind of quality of food. And so just for a minute, I kind of want to share where my perspective is when I approach food, because when I came into it, I didn't have any particular aspiration that I wanted to be a raw food chef. I certainly didn't think I was going to end up doing what I do. I just was someone who'd always played with food and liked creating food and liked using organic ingredients, and this whole crazy idea of not cooking the food was introduced. It just was kind of like, well, yeah, I guess, you don't have to use heat to make it taste good. And when you start to realize what food is, food's energy, right? I mean, when you start off, you've got the sun, you've got the earth, you've got an apple tree, you've got the light hitting it, you've got the minerals coming up from the soil. You have a manifestation in physical form of heavenly and earthly energies. So that's the premium state right there. Now, ideally, maybe we'll all eventually get back to a point when that's most how we want to eat. A lot of people do now, fruitarians and natural hygienists and things like that. And I think it's a really great way to eat. I don't think it's the only way. And the reason I do what I do is I don't really think we're going to turn the world on to raw food with celery sticks and avocados. So we do need what I would call recreational or transitional food, celebratory food that is familiar. Because if you go and you're introducing food to friends and family and it's something that you're really into, maybe you've progressed a long way on your raw food journey, and simple kale leaves wrapped around avocado are great for you, it's probably not going to turn on the family back in Iowa. I'm from Wisconsin. I just speak from experience that you have to have a few tricks up your sleeve. So when you take raw food that's made in a, what I would call, recreational or a celebratory kind of a way, you're making food that's familiar. Not everything, but most of the things you see on the menu here, most of the things you see at any raw food restaurant, and in a lot of raw food cookbooks, they're almost always a raw version of a cooked thing, right? So when you start out with that, you kind of, in some ways, it's tricky because we end up making imitation versions of something we don't want to eat in the first place, which is kind of a bizarre concept, but we spend a lot of time doing that, and sometimes it comes out really amazing, but the idea of mock this and imitation that and faux this, but it's all things that we're saying we don't want to begin with, so why are we trying to replicate them? Sometimes you can just let the raw food speak for itself. So if you take something like a lasagna, for example, well, lasagna is, we know it as a mixture of cheese and meat oftentimes and white flour for the pasta, but what is really lasagna? What do you like about it? I mean, that's the thing I'm trying to get through, is that when you're eating a food that's your comfort food, what is it when you're eating it that are the qualities that make it so comforting? And when you start to relate to food in that way, you start to realize that there's so many ways you can replicate it. And you don't have to use white flour, and you don't have to use meat, and you don't have to use dairy cheese. You can use a lot of other things in the fruit and vegetable and nut world that are very convincing. I mean, obviously, restaurants like this prove it quite well. At the school where I teach, we show people how to do that all the time. And when you start coming at it from that respect, and you understand the qualities of your foods, what your raw materials can do, it's really easy to replicate something. You can eat something like lasagna, or eat a really rich Mexican meal, or eat some fettuccine Alfredo. And I definitely go out and do sometimes, just for cuisine research. I'm not saying I recommend that, but when I'm traveling, especially internationally, I'm definitely not eating only raw food. I'm pretty much only vegetarian, but I love to try other food so I can get inspired. And so if that's something that you're comfortable with, you know, the way you eat, I would highly recommend that whenever you can. Expose yourself to a lot of different ways to approach food. Every culture's got its own unique way. But once you start taking apart each component of what's in a thing, back to talking about lasagna, you know, you bite into that. Why is it's so appealing? Because you've got a lot of flavor up front, right? You've got a rich, zesty sauce. It's not that hard to make a rich, zesty sauce using raw tomatoes. In fact, a lot of times I make sauces when I'm doing consulting or sometimes in-home trainings with people, and I've often got the nosy neighbor or the doubtful husband or someone that's really thinking, okay, you know, why do we have this guy in our house? Why is he making this big mess in our kitchen and making all this stuff? And they're not really that open to it. And then inevitably they'll end up trying something like maybe a raw marinara sauce. And instantly you can see it. They've just shifted their whole awareness because they thought it was kind of a weird, freaky, fringe thing that their wife or friend or whoever was into, and all of a sudden you've got their attention because now they can relate. It's something that's familiar. They've had a marinara sauce, or they've had some kind of a red pasta sauce before. You, on the other hand, are really deliberately creating that, knowing what those ingredients are and what properties they bring. You start to understand that, oh, if I want a cooked flavor in tomato sauce, I can't just use raw tomatoes. I have to use some sun-dried tomatoes. Sun-dried tomatoes add a rich, thick, kind of a zesty quality to it. They also add a darker color, so you're not just having this watery, thin tomato mush. It's more like a pomodoro or something. So you guys kind of following along with this? Good. I'm used to, when I speak, I'm usually speaking with a knife going in one hand and doing some other things. So to talk so much about food and to not actually be playing with food while I'm doing it is kind of a cool thing. So appreciate your patience. So next part of the lasagna though, what's another really appealing part of the lasagna? A cheese, right? I mean, who grew up and didn't at one point enjoy cheese? I'm from Wisconsin, so, okay. But what is it about cheese? Why is it so satisfying? You know, what are the elements in cheese and the way it shows up in lasagna that makes it so amazing? Well, again, it's rich, it's creamy. You know, ricotta cheese is actually kind of crumbly a little bit, sort of almost got a fluffy quality. Not that you only use ricotta when you make lasagna, but it's pretty common. So if you're going to make that cheese, you want to know the properties of your different nuts. And this is something I could talk for hours and hours about all individual properties of food. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of bouncing, just lightly touching to hopefully trigger some curiosity that you go and research yourself. There's a lot of good books out there, a lot of good websites that'll go into greater detail. But when you think about just the structure of the different nuts, like cashews, when you make a cashew cheese, it's really versatile. It's really smooth. It easily takes on almost any flavor. It doesn't have a distinct flavor like pine nuts. But to me, it's not really the best cheese for, say, a lasagna because it's not fluffy, right? It's really cashew cheese, and I mean this in a loving way, it's like joint compound or, you know, plaster. It's putty. You know, it sticks to stuff well. It's smooth. It's silky. It's creamy, but it doesn't have a lightness to it. It's like dense. Whereas you take almond cheese or macadamia nut cheese and you culture those nuts after grinding them up real smooth, they always have a little bit of a fluffiness to them. If you look at them side by side, almond cheese will never be slick and smooth and shiny. It'll always look rough and it'll be fluffy in texture. So these are the things when you're putting together your own recipe, I find it's really useful to understand each of those components and why I would choose a particular one.